for our background in exploitation of migrant workers in ASEAN is in Malaysia, Thailand and Singapore. Migrant workers from countries like Indonesia, Bangladesh, Myanmar, India and the Philippines play a crucial role in seafood, agriculture, livestock, fishery, hospitality, manufacturing and other industries. ASEAN migrant workers are nevertheless the unsung heroes of the region because they all are often low skills and undocumented and almost always overworked and unpaid. Although they play a key role in society in everything, such as constructing the infrastructure, childcare, and the med that ASEAN was depends on. This is because the problem is that ASEAN migrant workers already face multiple biases, like dangerous working practices, inadequate housing condition, and the lack of available to healthcare. Many of these migrant workers have story behind them that being forced into debt by intermediaries who help manage their visa, accommodations, documents, and travel with the exorbitant prices, which is the highest prices. They are all have lack of social security net and the legal protection as a citizens. They have no alternative but to get on with their jobs. The amount of money that they get from the salary is very valuable source of income for the families that they left behind to look for work overseas to get the better paying.
The ASEAN member states support the migration of workers since it can help to improve economic development of countries since they can fill in the labour shortage, upgrade the skill and also lead to the economic growth. However, over the past years, there have been many issues of the exploitation of the migrant workers such as abuse, wage manipulation, unsafe working condition and also many incidents, also illness. The frequent cases of abusive employers towards the migrant workers, which sometimes may lead to deaths, can cause the diplomatic tension between the migrant origin countries and the host countries. Among ASEAN members, Malaysians have many cases of the exploitation of migrant workers since their domestic and hard labour workers are mostly from Indonesia, Philippines, Bangladesh and Myanmar. For domestic labour, Malaysia employer prefer Indonesian house helper since they can easily communicate, have a similar lifestyle and most of them are Muslim. However, the 2018 case of Adelina Lisau sparked the public attention along with the Indonesian activist when she died due to the prolonged abuse by her employer who physically abused her, not given meals for days, and also were forced to sleep outside the house with her employer's dog. The attention then became angered when the court trial decided to release the employers from the charges, which then led to Indonesian government threatened to not send their Indonesian workers to Malaysia anymore. Not just Adeline Lisau, before her and after her, there are many cases of Indonesian helpers who being physically abused by their employers in Malaysia. Due to that, Malaysia-Indonesia relation seems to get tense since due to that case there are many Indonesian activists and also some of government representative who wants Malaysia to responsible for the incident. They also request Malaysia government to regulate a new law regarding the protection of migrant workers, especially from the Indonesia, so that these cases won't happen again. This is due to the 2006 Memorandum of Understanding or MOU on the recruitment and placement of Indonesian domestic workers and 2011 protocol seems not fully protecting those Indonesian workers in Malaysia anymore. That is why Indonesian government keeps on pushing Malaysia so that the MOU and the protocol will be upgraded. Since diplomatic tension can threaten the peace of ASEAN and also their good relation with other ASEAN member states, it is very important for the states to settle the crisis bilaterally so that it won't affect the organization as a whole.
The exploitation of the migrant workers in ASEAN region has led to the ASEAN Declaration on the Protection and Promotion of the Rights of Migrant Workers. The declaration was declared during the 12th ASEAN Summit on 13 January 2007 in Cebu, Philippines. This declaration has confirmed the shared responsibility of the ASEAN member countries in protecting and promoting the rights of the migrant workers. This declaration is divided into several parts. Hence, we will have to look at the general principles of this declaration, the obligations of the receiving states, the obligations of the sending states, and the commitments by ASEAN. The general principles of the declaration is that both receiving and sending states need to strengthen the political, economic, and social pillars of the ASEAN communities to ensure the full potential and dignity of the migrant workers according to the respective countries' laws and policies. The states are ought to cooperate to resolve the cases involving migrant workers in their respective countries for the sake of basic human rights. The states need to consider the fundamental rights of the migrant workers and their family which has been residing in the country. However, these must be in accordance with countries' domestic laws and policies. Next, the receiving states are obligated to put significant efforts to protect and promote the fundamental human rights, welfare, and the dignity of the migrant workers. They need to provide a fair and appropriate employment protection, payment of wages, and access to decent working and living conditions for the migrant workers. Migrant workers who are vulnerable to discrimination and exploitation need to be provided with adequate access to the legal and judicial system of the receiving states. Moving on to the obligations of the sending states, they need to ensure the access to the employment and livelihood opportunities of their citizens. They also need to have procedures and policies in order to facilitate migrations of the workers from one country to another. The most important thing to protect the workers from being exploited in another country is that they need to establish and promote legal practice to avoid malpractice in recruiting the migrant workers. Last but not least, ASEAN are committed in protecting and promoting the rights of migrant workers by promoting a decent employment of migrant workers, implementing a human resource development program, extending the assistance to the migrant workers who got caught up in the conflict, and many other commitments.
I'm going to talk about ASEAN adopt International Labour Organization and United Nations instrument which is the impacts the rights of migrant workers. The first point is reinforcing the defense and protection of migrant workers' rights. One of the suggested activities was to organize the ASEAN Forum on Migrant Labour by improving labour migration management in ASEAN countries. Next is amid the measures taken to ensure the rights of Asian foreign workers, migrant workers continue to be subjected to forced labor. This is such as underpayment, unstable workplaces, debt slavery, and trafficking of human beings. The third point is migrant workers are subject to employment violations prior to migration. This is because the government's weaknesses and their relatively poor negotiating position. Okay, next, in required to preserve the rights of foreign workers, the declaration calls on countries of origin and destination. This is to outline their responsibilities in the areas of enforcement against abuse, violence, and discrimination. Last but not least is ASEAN organize an annual forum on migrant labor, which is AFML, which acts as an open platform for governments, employees, and employers, organizations, and social movement stakeholders.
As for conclusion, people have started to migrate from their countries to another countries in order to have better living conditions as globalization has offered various job opportunities for them in another countries. As for example, People from Indonesia, Vietnam, and also Myanmar have came to Malaysia in order to find the new jobs. And among Southeast Asia member countries, Malaysia is one of the host countries that accept migrant people to work in the country. However, there were issues on the migrant workers, such as they are being overworked, underpaid, and commonly found undocumented. This clearly shows the lack of effectiveness on the enforcement of the rights on the migrant workers, and this makes them very vulnerable to any threats, violence, and exploitation. The exploitation has impacted the ASEAN member countries as it creates tension between them. This exploitation leads to the establishment of the ASEAN Declaration on the Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers. ASEAN also have adopted International Labour Organization and United Nations Instrument on the Rights of Migrant Workers. Prior to that, ASEAN Committee Migrant Workers was created to ensure that the rights of migrant workers are protected, which until these days it is not yet fully achieved.